My name is Rebecca Harrison. I'm 58, and I flew home from my dream European vacation to find my only daughter in a coma, put there by her drunk-driving husband. He thought he'd inherit her fortune. Instead, I made sure his next call was from a jail cell. It's a long story, but I have a feeling some of you might have the time. I'm writing this from my little home office in Chicago. It's a quiet afternoon here. I'd love to know where you're reading this from and what time it is in your part of the world. Let me know in the comments. It makes the world feel a little smaller, a little kinder. The coffee in Florence tastes different. It's richer, darker, with a hint of something ancient, like the cobblestones under my feet. I was sitting at a small wrought iron table in the Piazza della Signoria, the magnificent Palazzo Vecchio standing guard over the square as it had for centuries. This trip was my gift to myself. A month in Italy to celebrate my retirement after 35 years in finance. 35 years of navigating shark-infested boardrooms, of being the only woman at the table who had to be twice as prepared to be considered half as good. I'd earned this peace. My daughter, Olivia, had been skeptical. "A whole month, Mom? What will you do by yourself?" She've asked, her brow furrowed with that familiar, loving concern. She was an artist, all heart and vibrant color, and couldn't imagine a solitude that wasn't filled with the frantic energy of creation. "Oh, I think I'll manage," I'd laughed. "I plan on getting lost in museums, eating my weight in pasta, and maybe even learning a few words of Italian that aren't on a menu." I didn't tell her my real plan: to finally quiet the relentless analyst in my brain, the part of me that was always calculating risk, always looking for the flaw in the spreadsheet. We had a routine. Every morning, her time, she'd send me a "Good morning, Mom" text with a picture of her latest painting or her ridiculous cat Jasper. And every evening, my time, I'd reply with a photo of the sunset over the Arno or a particularly glorious plate of carbonara. For the first 2 weeks, it worked like clockwork, a comforting digital thread connecting our two worlds. But that morning, the thread had snapped. There was nothing. No picture of Jasper tangled in her easel, no cheerful message. I told myself not to be the worrier I'd always been. She was 32, a marrying woman. She had her own life. Maybe she was busy. Maybe her phone died. I sent my usual photo of the Duomo at sunrise and added, "Everything okay, sweetie? Missing my morning Jasper pic." Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, warming the ancient stones of the piazza. I toured the Uffizi Gallery, trying to lose myself in the genius of Botticelli and Michelangelo. But a thread of anxiety pulled at me, a dissonant note in the symphony of my perfect Italian day. By late afternoon, the silence from her end was deafening. It had been a full 24 hours. This wasn't like her. Not at all. My hand trembled slightly as I called her phone. It went straight to voicemail. "Olivia Harrison is unavailable." Her bright, artistic voice, usually a comfort, now sounded like a ghost. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the edges of my calm. I took a deep breath and dialed her husband, Blake. I'd never fully warmed to Blake. I remembered their wedding 8 months ago. He was handsome, charming, successful in that vague entrepreneur way that involved a lot of meetings and very few tangible products. During his wedding speech, he talked about Olivia's talent and how he was going to help her manage the business side of her art, to help her reach her full potential. Everyone had swooned. I'd felt a chill. It sounded less like support and more like a corporate takeover. But I'd buried the feeling, chiding myself for being cynical. I wanted my daughter to be happy. He answered on the fourth ring, his voice thick and groggy, as if from a deep sleep. "Hello? Blake, it's Rebecca. I'm sorry to bother you, but I can't get a hold of Olivia. Is she okay?" There was a pause, a rustle of what sounded like sheets. "Oh, hey, Rebecca. Yeah, she's fine. She's got a nasty flu, knocked her completely out. She's been sleeping all day." His words were meant to be reassuring, but my internal alarm bell started clanging. The analyst in my brain, the one I'd tried to put on vacation, suddenly woke up and was demanding data. In the background, I didn't hear the muffled quiet of a sick room in their Chicago apartment. I heard a faint, rhythmic sound, a gentle, lapping sound of water against a hull. And then a bird cried out. not the coo of a Chicago pigeon, but the sharp, piercing call of a seagull. A flu? Is she running a fever? Did you call a doctor? My questions were rapid fire. Nah, she's tough, just needs to sleep it off, he said, his voice slurring slightly. We're just taking it easy at home. At home, but I could hear the sea. I knew the sound of Lake Michigan, and this wasn't it. This was the open ocean. Blake, where are you? I asked, my voice dropping, losing its warmth and gaining a hard, analytical edge. He told you I'm at home, he insisted, a flicker of irritation in his tone. Look, Rebecca, I've got to go. She's stirring. I'll have her call you when she's feeling better. Before I could say another word, he hung up. I sat there, frozen, the sounds of the lively Italian square fading into a dull roar in my ears. He was lying. It wasn't a clumsy lie. It was a confident, dismissive one. The lie of a man who didn't think he'd be questioned, who didn't care enough to make it convincing. The seagulls, the sound of waves. He wasn't in Chicago. My blood ran cold. Something was terribly, fundamentally wrong. I abandoned my half-finished cappuccino. My hands, usually so steady when signing million-dollar contracts, fumbled as I pulled out my phone. I didn't call back. I didn't text. I opened a web browser, my fingers flying across the screen. Florence to Chicago, one way, earliest flight. The retirement trip was over. The peace was shattered. I was no longer a tourist enjoying her golden years. I was a mother, and my instincts were screaming that my daughter was in danger. As I confirmed the booking for a flight that left in 3 hours, I had a chilling thought. I wasn't just flying toward my daughter, I was flying into a storm, and Blake was standing right at the center of it. The flight across the Atlantic was a 14-hour-long exercise in controlled panic. I refused the bland airline meals, the flimsy pillows. I just sat, staring at the flight tracker on the screen in front of me, watching the tiny animated plane inch its way across the vast, dark ocean. With every mile we crossed, the knot of dread in my stomach tightened. I replayed the conversation with Blake over and over. The seagulls, the casual, almost bored tone of his lies. What was he hiding? My mind, the one I could usually command, was a whirlwind of terrifying possibilities, each one worse than the last. I landed at O'Hare in a daze of jet lag and fear. I didn't go to my own house. I took a taxi straight to Olivia's apartment in Lincoln Park. I used the emergency key she'd given me, my heart pounding against my ribs as I turned the lock. "Olivia?" I called out, my voice echoing in the sudden silence. The apartment was empty. Eerily so. A half-finished painting stood on her easel, the vibrant colors a stark contrast to the sterile quiet. Her cat, Jasper, wound himself around my legs, meowing pitifully, a sound of genuine distress. His food bowl was empty. His water dish was bone dry. Olivia would never, ever neglect her cat. She'd once delayed a weekend trip because she couldn't find the exact brand of organic cat food he preferred. This was my proof, undeniable proof that whatever Blake had said was a lie. They hadn't been taking it easy at home. Olivia hadn't been here for at least a day, maybe more. Then I saw it. Tucked into the mail slot of her front door was a crisp, white envelope. It wasn't junk mail. It had the stark, serious logo of Northwestern Memorial Hospital. My breath caught in my throat. I tore it open, my fingers ripping the paper. It was a formal notice. A patient admission summary. Patient Olivia Harrison, admitted 6 days ago. Condition critical. 6 days. For 6 days, my daughter had been lying in a hospital bed, and I'd been sipping wine in Tuscany. For 6 days, that monster she married had been lying to me, telling me she had the flu. The betrayal was so profound it felt like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. The taxi ride to the hospital was a blur. I clutched the notice in my hand, the paper crinkling into a damp ball. I rehearsed what I would say, what I would do, but nothing could have prepared me for the reality. The intensive care unit is a place where hope and despair hang in the air in equal measure, thick with the scent of antiseptic and the quiet, rhythmic beeping of machines that count out a life second by second. A kind but weary-looking doctor named Evans met me. He had the gentle eyes of a man who delivered bad news for a living. He led me to her room, and I saw her. My beautiful, vibrant daughter, the girl who painted sunsets and laughed with her whole body, was lying still and pale, a tube down her throat, her head swathed in bandages. A constellation of wires connected her to a universe of monitors, each one blinking a tiny, fragile light. "What happened?" I whispered, my voice raw and broken. "He had a teleIOS and a surgery. You could turn your for the HIF." Her husband, Blake, he was with her? Dr. Evans' professional demeanor tightened almost imperceptibly. He was the driver. According to the police report, the car was traveling at over 90 miles per hour. His blood alcohol level was well over the legal limit. He told the officers at the scene that Ms. Harrison had become hysterical and grabbed the wheel, causing the crash. He paused, letting the words sink in. Mr. Harrison walked away with a few scratches and a bruised shoulder. He signed the initial admission paperwork and left. We haven't seen him since. The world tilted on its axis. He hadn't just lied to me. He had lied to the police. He had blamed her. Then he had walked away and left her here alone, fighting for her life while he partied on a yacht somewhere with seagulls. Rage, pure and hot, burned through the fog of my grief. It was a feeling so intense it was almost clarifying. This wasn't just a tragic accident. This was something else, something dark and deliberate. As I stood there, a young nurse with kind eyes and a name tag that read Maria came in to check Olivia's vitals. She saw the look on my face, the raw shock. She offered me a cup of water, her touch on my arm gentle. "It must be so hard," she said softly. "Her husband, he seemed so upset when he was here." "Upset?" I asked, my voice sharp. Maria hesitated, looking uncomfortable. "Well, angry upset, maybe? He was on the phone. I heard him say something like, 'This ruins everything. The whole timeline is shot to hell.' I thought it was a strange thing to say." The timeline is shot to hell. Not, "Is my wife going to live?" Not, "What can I do?" But a complaint about a ruined plan. Later that evening, as I sat vigil by Olivia's bed, Maria quietly approached me again. "I don't know if this means anything," she whispered, looking over her shoulder, "but I was cleaning out the family waiting room the night of the accident. He was in there for a while making calls. I found this in the trash can after he left." She handed me a crumpled, torn piece of paper. I smoothed it out. It was a printed flight itinerary, a one-way ticket to the Bahamas, in Blake's name, scheduled to depart in 2 days. I stared at the paper, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying speed. The accident, the lies, the trip to Miami, the flight to the Bahamas. This wasn't a man grieving his wife. This was a man trying to escape. And my daughter, my unconscious, helpless daughter, was just a loose end he was trying to tie up. Leaving Olivia's side was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but I knew I couldn't fight this battle from a hospital chair. I needed a war room. I needed information. After a long, sleepless night listening to the rhythmic pulse of the machines keeping my daughter alive, I went back to her apartment. The silence was a physical weight. Jasper, the cat, seemed to understand. He didn't meow for food, but instead sat quietly on the sofa, watching me with wide green eyes. I felt a kinship with the small animal.
We were both waiting for Olivia to come home. But waiting wasn't enough. I needed to act. My grief was a roaring fire, but my 35 years in the world of finance had taught me how to channel emotion into cold, hard strategy. Blake had made a critical error. He underestimated me. He saw a retired mother, a soft touch. He didn't see the woman who had clawed her way up in a male-dominated industry, the woman who could spot a fraudulent expense report from a mile away. I once uncovered a multi-million-dollar embezzlement scheme at my old firm by noticing a tiny discrepancy in a quarterly report, a single digit in the wrong column that just felt wrong. This felt 1,000 times more wrong. I started with the most obvious place, the mail. Piled on the kitchen counter was a week's worth of letters, bills, junk mail, and then I saw it, an envelope from a life insurance company. My hands were surprisingly steady as I opened it. It was a confirmation of a new policy. Policyholder, Olivia Harrison. Beneficiary, Blake Harrison. Coverage amount, $500,000. With a double indemnity clause for accidental death, which meant it would pay out $1 million. The policy was dated just 2 months after their wedding.
The air left my lungs. This wasn't just about escaping. This was about cashing in. The phrase accidental death seemed to mock me from the page. He hadn't just crashed the car, he had aimed it. I needed more than just a piece of paper. I needed access. I remembered a conversation with Olivia a few months ago. She'd been complaining about managing her bills, and I, ever the practical mother, had suggested she add my name to her primary credit card count as an authorized user. Just for emergencies, sweetie, I'd said. Like, if you lose your card while traveling. She had rolled her eyes, saying Blake was helping her with all that now, but she had agreed, mostly to humor me. Thank God for that. I sat down at her desk, opened her laptop, and logged into the credit card portal. The screen loaded, a neat column of transactions. And there it was, a digital trail of his betrayal, written in dollars and cents. The charges painted a sickening picture. There were the usual groceries and gas from before the accident. Then, the day after my daughter was admitted to the ICU, the spending pattern changed dramatically. A $1,200 charge at a liquor store in Miami Beach specializing in vintage champagne, a $5,000 charge at a high-end men's clothing store, and then the charge that made my vision swim with rage, a single transaction for $25,000 to a company called Elysian Yacht Charters. He was spending her money she earned from her art and from the small inheritance her father had left her, to party on a luxury yacht while she lay in a coma. My late husband, a kind, gentle man, had worked his whole life to provide for us, to leave Olivia that nest egg so she could pursue her art without worry. The thought of Blake's grimy hands on that money made me feel physically ill. But there was one charge that stood out, not for its size, but for its regularity. Every month for the past 6 months, there was a recurring payment of $2,000 to something called Luxuria Concierge. It sounded expensive and vague. It was a loose thread, and I knew from experience that pulling on a loose thread is often how the whole rotten tapestry unravels. I picked up the phone and called the one person I knew I could trust implicitly. Sarah Jenkins had been my best friend since college. We'd navigated bad dates, celebrated promotions, and held each other's hands through my husband's funeral. She was also one of the sharpest corporate lawyers in Chicago before she retired. "Sarah," I said, my voice tight, "I need a lawyer." I explained everything, the words tumbling out of me in a torrent of grief and fury, the accident, Blake's lies, the insurance policy, the yacht. Sarah listened patiently, the way only a true friend can, letting me pour out the poison before she spoke. "Rebecca, slow down," she said, her voice a calm, anchoring presence. "Okay, this is bad. This is very, very bad. But we are not going to panic. We are going to be methodical." "I want to destroy him, Sarah," I whispered, the words tasting like ash. "I want to freeze his accounts, cut him off, leave him with nothing." "I know you do," she said, "and we will. But we have to do this by the book, or he'll slip through our fingers. He's her legal husband. Right now, he holds a lot of cards. We can't just call the bank and freeze the accounts. They won't do it without a court order or clear proof of criminal fraud. What you have is deeply suspicious, but we need to build an undeniable case. Collect everything, every statement, every receipt, document every lie. We're going to build a wall of evidence so high he'll never be able to climb over it." Her words cut through my rage and gave me what I desperately needed: a plan, a direction. I wasn't just a grieving mother anymore. I was an investigator, and my target was the man who had tried to murder my daughter. Armed with Sarah's advice and a folder thick with printouts, I felt a flicker of my old professional self return. This was familiar territory, building a case, brick by painstaking brick. The first step, Sarah advised, was to make a formal attempt through the proper channels, even if we expected to fail. It was about establishing a record, showing that we had tried to act reasonably before escalating. It was a move on the legal chessboard. The next morning, I walked into the downtown branch of Olivia's bank. It was one of those grand old buildings with marble floors and soaring ceilings, designed to make you feel small and insignificant. I was dressed in a simple black suit, my armor for the day. I had an appointment with the branch manager, a man named Mr. Henderson, whose polished shoes and condescending smile set my teeth on edge. Sarah came with me, not as my lawyer in an official capacity, but as a supportive friend. We sat in his glass-walled office, the sounds of the busy bank muffled around us. I laid out the documents on his gleaming mahogany desk: the credit card statement with the yacht charge, the confirmation of the life insurance policy, a printed copy of the hospital's admission summary. I presented them in a neat, logical order, just as I would have in a boardroom. "Mr. Henderson," I began, my voice even and controlled, "my daughter, Olivia Harrison, is one of your clients. She is currently incapacitated at Northwestern Medical Center. As you can see from these statements, her husband, Blake Harrison, is using their joint funds for what can only be described as a lavish vacation while she is fighting for her life." He glanced at the papers, his expression a careful mask of professional sympathy. "This is a terrible situation, Mrs. Harrison, truly awful, and we at the bank extend our deepest sympathies." "I appreciate that," I said, cutting to the chase. "What I need is for you to place an immediate administrative freeze on all joint accounts and credit cards. I am her mother, and I am on the credit card as an authorized user. I believe he is committing financial abuse and putting her assets at risk." Henderson steepled his fingers and leaned back in his chair, a gesture of paternalistic authority I'd seen 1,000 times. "I understand your concern. I truly do. However, our hands are tied. Mr. Harrison is her legal spouse and a co-owner on the joint checking account. The credit card is in her name, but he is legally permitted to use it as her husband. Without a court order or a power of attorney document that specifically grants you financial control, we cannot legally block his access. To do so would expose the bank to significant legal liability." "But this is fraud," I insisted, my voice rising despite my best efforts to remain calm. "He's draining her accounts while she's in a coma. This isn't a husband buying groceries. This is a man funding a getaway on a $25,000 yacht. From the bank's perspective," he said, his tone becoming cooler, "it's a husband using a joint account. It's a he said, she said situation, and legally we have to remain neutral. For all we know, this trip was pre-planned and pre-approved by your daughter. Do you have a police report stating he's a suspect in a crime?" "The police are investigating, but he told them she was driving," I said, the words tasting like poison. Henderson gave a small, almost imperceptible shrug. "Then I'm afraid there is nothing we can do at this time. Our policy is quite clear. My advice would be to consult with a lawyer and pursue this through the legal system. The moment we receive a court order, we will, of course, comply immediately." I stared at him, at his polished desk and his perfectly knotted tie. He was the system, a wall of procedures and liability shields designed to protect itself, not the vulnerable. Blake knew this. He had counted on this. He had wrapped himself in the legal protections of marriage like a shield and was using it to bleed my daughter dry. He wasn't just a monster. He was a smart monster. We walked out of the bank and into the bustling Chicago streets. The city noise felt jarring after the tomb-like quiet of the manager's office. I felt a wave of despair wash over me. It was the first time in this whole ordeal that I felt truly powerless. My financial acumen, my years of experience, meant nothing in the face of that bureaucratic wall. "I told you this would happen," Sarah said gently, putting a hand on my arm. "Don't be discouraged. This was a necessary step. Now we have an official record of the bank refusing to act. We have a paper trail showing we tried the reasonable route. This strengthens our case for an emergency court order." "He's going to get away with it, isn't he?" I said, the fight draining out of me. "By the time we get a court order, the accounts will be empty. Her college fund savings, the money from her father, everything will be gone. He'll be in the Bahamas." "No, he won't," Sarah said, her voice firm, pulling me back from the edge. "He's arrogant. He thinks he's untouchable. He's going to get sloppy, and we're going to be there to catch him when he does. This isn't the end, Rebecca. This is just the end of round one." But as I looked up at the towering skyscrapers, symbols of order and power, they felt like the bars of a cage. Blake was out there, free and spending, while my daughter was trapped in her silent battle, and I was trapped in a legal maze designed to slow me down. For the first time, I was afraid that my best wouldn't be good enough. That night, sitting in the dim light of Olivia's apartment, the feeling of powerlessness from the bank still clinging to me like a damp coat, I decided I couldn't just wait for the courts. Sarah was working on the legal angle, but I needed to do something myself. I needed to pull on that loose thread, Luxuria Concierge. My fingers flew across the keyboard. A quick search revealed it was a high-end service based in Miami that arranged bespoke experiences for the ultra-wealthy, private jets, rare wines, and, as I saw in their glossy online brochure, luxury yacht charters. There was a phone number. My heart started to beat a little faster. I had an idea. It was a long shot, a gamble, but it was better than sitting here staring at the walls. I picked up the phone. When a smooth, professional voice answered, "Luxuria Concierge, how may I assist?" I took a deep breath and plunged in. "Hi there," I said, pitching my voice to sound cheerful and slightly flustered, the voice of a harried but competent assistant. "I'm calling on behalf of Blake Harrison. I'm his new assistant, Chloe. He's asked me to confirm the final details for his charter, but he was in a rush and the line was bad. I just want to make sure I have everything correct for his guests." There was a pause, the click of a keyboard. "Of course, I have the booking here for Mr. Harrison on the Serenity, a 3-day charter." "That's the one," I said, scribbling furiously on a notepad. "And he just wanted me to double-check the guest list for the catering. I have Mr. Harrison and Tiffany?" I said the name as if I were reading it from a list. "That's correct, Mr. Harrison and Miss Tiffany Dubois. Just the two of them. We have the vintage Dom Perignon he requested on ice, and the chef is preparing the seafood tower for their dinner this evening." Bingo! I had a name. Tiffany Dubois. It felt like a small, hard-won victory. "Perfect," I said. "Thank you so much for your help." I hung up before he could ask any more questions. A quick search for Tiffany Dubois Miami on Instagram was all it took. Her profile was public. And there it was. A photo posted just 3 hours ago. It was her, a blonde woman in a tiny bikini, laughing on the deck of a yacht, her arms slung around a man's shoulders. He was holding a glass of champagne, grinning at the camera without a care in the world. The caption read, "Living my best life with my amazing man. #YachtLife, Miami, blessed." I stared at the image, at his smiling, treacherous face. The rage that had been simmering inside me boiled over. It wasn't a hot, screaming rage. It was an ice-cold fury, a sudden, absolute clarity. The bank wouldn't help me, the law was slow, but I had his phone number. I dialed. He answered on the second ring, his voice lazy and warm from the sun. "Hello?" "Blake," I said. My voice was quiet, devoid of any emotion. His tone shifted immediately. "Rebecca, look, I told you, she's fine. I'm handling things. You don't need to keep calling." "I'm not calling about Olivia. I'm calling about a charge on her credit card for a yacht in Miami." The silence on the other end of the line was thick with his shock. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head as he tried to formulate a new lie. "It's a business trip," he stammered. "A last-minute thing. An opportunity came up. For an investment. For Olivia's future." "Is Tiffany Dubois part of that investment?" I asked, the name dropping into the conversation like a stone into a still pond. The silence this time was longer. When he spoke again, the charm was gone, replaced with a venomous snarl. "You've been spying on me. You have no right." "I have every right," I shot back, my own voice finally cracking with the force of my anger. "That is my daughter's money you're spending on your girlfriend while Olivia is lying in a hospital bed, fighting for every breath she takes. That money came from her salary as a successful artist and the inheritance from her father." "You don't know anything," he yelled, his voice rising. "That money is mine as much as it is hers. We're married. You're just a bitter old woman who can't stand to see her daughter happy with someone else." "Happy?" I laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You call this happy? You crashed a car at 90 miles an hour with her in it, you lied to the police, you abandoned her, and you ran off to party with your mistress? You were so jealous of her success, you even convinced her not to take that promotion to gallery manager last year." "You should have stayed in Europe," he hissed, the threat now naked and undisguised. "You have no idea what you're getting into. With my rights as Olivia's husband, I have all the power here. I can make decisions for her, medical decisions. You need to back off, for her sake." I sat there, my hand still gripping the phone, his final words echoing in my ears. Medical decisions. It wasn't just a threat against me, it was a threat against Olivia. He wasn't just trying to steal her money, he was reminding me that he had the power to end her life. The fear returned, colder and sharper than before. But underneath it, something new had taken root. Determination. He had made another mistake. He had not only confirmed his guilt, he had revealed his weapon. And now, I knew exactly what I was fighting for. It wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about survival. The phone call with Blake changed everything. His threat about making medical decisions was a declaration of war. I immediately called Sarah and repeated his words verbatim. "My God," she breathed into the phone. "He's not even trying to hide it. He's telling us what he's capable of." There was a new urgency in her voice. "Rebecca, this is what we needed, a direct threat. This moves us from financial abuse to endangerment. I'm going to draft an emergency petition for a temporary asset restraining order first thing in the morning. And I'm going to file for temporary medical guardianship for you. We have to strip him of his power now." While Sarah mobilized the legal cavalry, I felt a desperate need to keep moving, to keep digging. Waiting felt like a surrender. It was then that Maria, the nurse from the ICU, called me on my cell. Her voice was hushed, nervous. "Mrs. Harrison, I'm sorry to bother you at home, but something has been weighing on my conscience." She told me again about the torn-up flight itinerary to the Bahamas she'd found in the trash. "I know I gave it to you, but I wanted to make sure you understood. He wasn't just leaving, he was fleeing the country. I hope it helps." "It helps more than you know, Maria," I said, my voice thick with gratitude.
"Thank you. You are a good person." Her small act of courage was the light in the darkness. It solidified the picture of Blake not as a grieving husband, but as a fugitive. He had a plan all along. The accident hadn't been a drunken mistake. It had been a failed execution. With this new piece of the puzzle, I knew I needed more than just a lawyer. I needed someone who could dig into the shadows of Blake's life, someone who wasn't constrained by legal procedures. I hired a private investigator, a gruff, no-nonsense ex-cop named Frank Miller. I met him in a dingy diner that smelled of stale coffee and fried bacon. He looked like he'd stepped out of an old detective movie, all sharp eyes and weary cynicism. I gave him everything I had: Blake's name, the photo from the yacht, the name Tiffany Dubois, and the mysterious Luxuria concierge payments. "And one more thing," I said, sliding a piece of paper across the table. "He has monthly payments going to at least 3 other women. I found them on an old bank statement. I want to know who they are. I want to know everything." Frank looked at the file, then up at me, his gaze sharp and assessing. "This will get ugly, ma'am." "It's already ugly, Mr. Miller. I just need you to turn on the lights." While Frank started his work, Sarah and I were in a race against time. We filed the emergency petitions with the court. The legal system, which had seemed so impenetrable just days before, began to move, albeit at a glacial pace. We were given a hearing date in 2 weeks. 2 weeks? I exclaimed to Sarah over the phone. He could empty the accounts and be in a non-extradition country by then. "I know," Sarah said, her voice tight with frustration, "but it's the best they could do on an emergency basis. We just have to hope he doesn't spook. Right now, he thinks he's still in control. He thinks his threats worked. We need him to believe that." The next few days were agonizing. I spent my days at the hospital, holding Olivia's hand, talking to her, telling her stories from her childhood, praying she could hear me. I'd read her favorite books aloud, the familiar words a comfort in the sterile, beeping silence of the ICU. At night, I would go back to her apartment and pore over financial records, looking for any other clue I might have missed. The call from Frank came late one evening. "I've got something," he said, his voice grim. "Your boy Blake is quite the operator. The women you mentioned, they're not mistresses in the traditional sense. He was paying their rent, their car payments. It looks like he was cultivating them, keeping them on the hook. But that's not the interesting part." He paused. I ran a deep background, different states, known aliases, and I got a hit. 2 years ago in San Diego, a man named Jason Cole was in a very similar car accident. His girlfriend at the time, a wealthy artist, was seriously injured. He walked away without a scratch. And just like with your daughter, he had taken out a substantial life insurance policy on her a few months prior. I sank into a chair, the phone feeling heavy as lead in my hand. Jason Cole? That's him? It's one of his names. The girlfriend's name was Melissa Winters. She survived, but the case was closed. Not enough evidence to prove intent. She claimed he had been pressuring her to liquidate her investment portfolio right before the accident. The parallels were chilling, exact. It was his modus operandi. Find a woman with money, charm her, isolate her, secure her assets, and then create an accident. My daughter wasn't his first victim. He was a predator, and he had been honing his craft. "There is more," Frank said, his voice dropping lower. I spoke to a source at the San Diego PD. After the accident, Jason Cole, or Blake, tried to have Melissa Winters' life support disconnected, claiming it was what she would have wanted. He had a medical power of attorney she'd signed. The phone slipped from my fingers and clattered onto the floor. The threat he'd made to me wasn't just a threat. It was a rehearsal. Frank's revelation hit me like a physical blow. A medical power of attorney. The phrase echoed in the silent apartment, sinister and suffocating. Blake hadn't just been threatening me with a vague possibility. He had been telling me his exact plan, a plan he had attempted before. My first instinct was to run back to the hospital, to stand guard over Olivia's bed and never leave. But I knew that wasn't enough. A mother's love couldn't stop a legal document. I called Sarah, my voice shaking so badly I could barely form the words. Sarah, he's done this before. He had a medical power of attorney for the other woman. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Oh, Rebecca, no! We have to check, Sarah. We have to see if he tricked Olivia into signing one. Her legal files, Sarah said immediately, her lawyer's mind kicking into high gear. She uses that firm downtown, right? Willoughby and Finch? I know one of the senior partners there. Let me make a call. We'll go there first thing in the morning.
That night, sleep was impossible. I sat in the dark, the city lights of Chicago painting sterile patterns on the walls, and I thought about how easily a predator can weaponize love. Trust, intimacy, the desire to build a life together. Blake had twisted all of these beautiful things into tools for his own dark purposes. How many times had he said, "This is just in case something happens to me, honey. It protects you." How easy it would have been for Olivia, so deeply in love, to sign a piece of paper without a second thought. The next morning, Sarah and I were at the law firm the moment it opened. Sarah's connection got us a meeting with Olivia's lawyer, a polished man who seemed more concerned with billable hours than his client's well-being. "A medical power of attorney?" he said, flipping through a thick file. "Yes, of course. A standard part of any estate planning package. We have it right here. Miss Harrison appointed her husband, Mr. Blake Harrison, as her sole agent, signed and notarized 3 months ago." He slid the document across the table. There it was, in black and white. Olivia's flowing, artistic signature at the bottom of a page that gave Blake the legal authority to make life-or-death decisions for her. He had the power to walk into that hospital, present that paper, and tell the doctors to stop treatment. He could murder her, legally, and there was nothing I could do to stop him. "This is his endgame," I said to Sarah, as we stood on the pavement outside the law office, the legal document feeling like a death warrant in my hands. "The restraining order on the assets will make him desperate. He'll realize the money is slipping away. His only remaining asset is the life insurance policy. And the only way to collect on that—" I couldn't finish the sentence. "He won't get the chance," Sarah said, her face set like stone. "This document, combined with the testimony from the private investigator and the police report from San Diego, this is our silver bullet. We're no longer just filing for guardianship. We're filing an emergency motion to invalidate this document on the grounds of duress and potential homicide. We're taking this to a judge today." But first, there was one more call I had to make. Frank had given me a number for Melissa Winters. It felt like an intrusion, asking a woman to revisit the worst trauma of her life. But she was the only other person in the world who truly understood the monster we were dealing with. I dialed the number, my heart pounding. A hesitant voice answered. "Melissa?" I said softly. "My name is Rebecca Harrison. I'm Olivia's mother." There was a choked sob on the other end of the line. I was so afraid this would happen again. I tried to find a way to warn people, but he just disappears. He changes his name, his story. "Is your daughter—" "She's alive," I said quickly. "She's fighting." "Melissa, he has a medical power of attorney for her, just like he did for you." "You have to stop him," she said, her voice gaining strength, a core of steel beneath the pain. "He came to the hospital. He stood over my bed with the papers in his hand, talking to the doctors about my wishes. He was so convincing, so charmingly grief-stricken. If my brother hadn't been there, if he hadn't physically thrown him out of the room, I wouldn't be alive today. The police didn't believe me afterwards. They said it was a family dispute." Her words sent a chill down my spine. "Melissa," I asked, my voice low, "would you be willing to tell your story to a judge?" There was a long pause. I could hear her breathing, the sound of a woman weighing her own peace against the life of a stranger. "He took 2 years of my life. The physical therapy, the nightmares, the legal battles to get my own money back after our divorce. I won't let him take another minute from your daughter. Tell me when and where. I'll be there. When I hung up the phone, I felt a profound shift. This was no longer just my fight. It was ours. The fight of two mothers, one by birth, one by shared experience, and two survivors. We had the truth on our side. Now we just had to make sure the world listened. With Melissa's testimony secured, Sarah moved with the speed and precision of a battlefield commander. She filed the emergency motion, citing immediate and credible threats to Olivia's life. The court, seeing the gravity of the situation, scheduled an emergency hearing not in 2 weeks, but in 48 hours. It wouldn't be a full trial, but a preliminary hearing in a judge's chambers to rule on the immediate motions. My request for temporary medical and financial guardianship and the invalidation of Blake's power of attorney. Blake was served with the notice. His response was immediate and arrogant. His lawyer, a slick, overconfident man named Peterson, called Sarah and suggested a, quote, pre-hearing meeting at Sarah's office to resolve this unfortunate family misunderstanding without wasting the court's time. It's a trap, I told Sarah. Of course it is, she replied, a grim smile on her face. He wants to intimidate us. He thinks we're just two emotional, retired women. He has no idea what's about to hit him. We'll take the meeting. The day of the meeting, I dressed with deliberate care. I chose a charcoal gray suit, severe and professional. I wanted him to see me as a threat, not a victim. I needed him to see me as the financial executive I had been, not the grieving mother I was. I needed him to see me as a threat, not a victim. Blake and his lawyer arrived at Sarah's office right on time. He had the audacity to look tan and rested. He was wearing an expensive suit, his hair perfectly styled. He looked like a man who had just returned from a pleasant vacation, not a man whose wife was in the ICU. He walked toward me, his face a mask of sorrowful concern. "Rebecca," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "I'm so glad we can talk. This has all been a terrible misunderstanding. I've been out of my mind with worry." I just looked at him. I didn't speak. I let the silence hang in the air, refusing to play my part in his charade. We sat around Sarah's large conference table. Peterson, his lawyer, started the proceedings. My client is, of course, devastated by his wife's accident. He has been trying to manage her affairs in her absence, as is his duty as her husband. These legal actions are unnecessary and deeply hurtful during what is already a difficult time. He went on, talking about Blake's unwavering love for Olivia, his commitment to her recovery. Blake sat beside him, nodding sadly, occasionally dabbing at a dry eye with a handkerchief. It was a masterful performance. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have almost believed him. Sarah let him talk, her hands folded calmly on the table in front of her. When he was finished, she leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Peterson," she said, her voice quiet, but carrying the weight of absolute authority. "We can dispense with the theatrics. We are here to discuss the legal instruments currently in place, specifically the medical power of attorney that grants your client the sole authority to make life or death decisions for her."
Blake spoke up, his voice cracking with manufactured emotion. "I would only ever do what's best for my wife. I love her more than life itself. This document is just a formality to ensure her wishes are respected if the worst should happen." He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Rebecca, you have to believe me." I met his gaze, my own expression unreadable. I thought of Olivia lying in that hospital bed. I thought of Melissa Winters and the 2 years of her life that he had stolen. I thought of the cool, calculating monster sitting across from me, cloaked in the guise of a loving husband. I let him finish his speech. I let him dig his own grave with every lie that fell from his lips. The arrogance of the man was breathtaking. He truly believed he was smarter than everyone else in the room. He believed his charm was a superpower that could bend reality reality to his will. He had no idea that his world was about to be dismantled, piece by piece, right here in this quiet, sunlit conference room. The trap was set. All I had to do was spring it. When Blake finished his heart-wrenching monologue about his love for Olivia, a heavy silence settled over the conference room. His lawyer, Peterson, looked smug, as if the matter was settled. Blake himself looked relieved, confident that his performance had once again saved the day. I took a slow, deliberate breath. It was my turn. "Thank you for sharing that, Blake," I said, my voice as calm and flat as a frozen lake. It was very moving. I let the words hang in the air for a beat before I continued. "Before we discuss what's best for my daughter's future, I'd like to clarify something about your past." I leaned forward, my eyes locked on his. "The name Melissa Winters? Does that mean anything to you?" It was like watching a film run in slow motion. The color drained from Blake's face. A tiny muscle in his jaw began to twitch. He shot a panicked glance at his lawyer, who frowned, confused. I don't know who you're talking about," Blake stammered, his carefully constructed composure shattering like glass. "Really?" I said, raising an eyebrow. "That's strange, because she knows you, though she knew you as Jason Cole." I slid the first folder across the polished table. It was the police report from the San Diego accident. "She was your girlfriend, an artist, just like Olivia. You were in a car accident, just like with Olivia. And you had taken out a life insurance policy on her, just like you did with Olivia." Peterson, the lawyer, snatched the report and his eyes widened as he read it. Blake was speechless, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "And then there's this," I said, sliding the second folder across the table. Inside were the printouts from the yacht charter company and the Instagram photos of him and Tiffany Dubois. "This is you, I believe, out of your mind with worry in Miami. The charge for this little getaway, by the way, was put on my daughter's credit card the day after her surgery." Peterson's face was now a thundercloud. He turned to Blake, hissing, "What is this? You told me you were at a business conference." Blake ignored him, his eyes wild with fury, fixed on me. "You have no right. This is an invasion of my privacy." "And this," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper as I pushed the third and final folder forward. "This is a copy of the flight itinerary to the Bahamas you threw away in the hospital waiting room, a one-way ticket. It seems you weren't planning on sticking around to manage Olivia's recovery at all." The room was silent except for the sound of Blake's ragged breathing. He looked trapped, a cornered animal. "You're right about one thing, Blake," I said, standing up slowly. "As Olivia's husband, you do have the power to make medical decisions for her." I paused, letting the weight of his own threat settle back on him. "But I wonder what the judge at our emergency hearing tomorrow will think of that power when he hears the sworn testimony of the last woman you tried to murder." As if on cue, the conference room door opened, and Melissa Winters walked in. She was smaller than I had imagined, with a quiet strength in her eyes that spoke of unimaginable resilience. She didn't look at me or Sarah. She walked directly to the table and stood opposite Blake, her gaze unwavering. The sight of her, alive and whole and there, broke him. "No!" he screamed, shoving his chair back so hard it crashed against the wall. "You can't be here! It's a lie! She's lying!" He pointed a trembling finger at me. "This is all her, a vindictive old bitch who never wanted her daughter to be happy." His polished mask was gone, revealing the writhing, ugly thing beneath. He lunged across the table, his face contorted in a mask of pure hatred, his hands reaching for me. Before he could take another step, the conference room door burst open again. This time, it was Frank Miller, my PI, and two uniformed police officers. "Blake Harrison," one of the officers said, his voice booming in the suddenly silent room, "you're under arrest." Peterson, his lawyer, was on his feet, sputtering. "On what grounds? My client has done nothing wrong."
Actually, Frank said, stepping forward and holding up a small digital recorder, your client just confessed to motive and displayed violent intent, which we have on tape, not to mention the mountain of evidence for fraud, attempted murder, and conspiracy. He gestured toward the folders on the table. Mrs. Harrison has been very thorough. As the officers cuffed a screaming, struggling Blake, his eyes found mine once last. They were filled not with remorse, but with pure, unadulterated hatred. The hatred of a predator who had been outsmarted, outmaneuvered, and ultimately defeated. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I just felt a profound, bone-deep sense of relief. I looked over at Melissa, who gave me a small, watery smile. We had done it. We had taken the power back. I turned my back on the wreckage of Blake's life being dragged out of the room and walked to the window. Outside, the city of Chicago hummed with life, oblivious. My fight was over. Now I could go back to the only thing that mattered, being with my daughter. The arrest was only the beginning of the legal storm, but the decisive battle had been won. With Blake in custody, the emergency hearing became a formality. A grim-faced judge reviewed the evidence, the financial records, the San Diego police report, Melissa's sworn affidavit, and the recording of Blake's violent outburst. He granted me full temporary guardianship, both medical and financial, in under 15 minutes. Blake's power of attorney was declared null and void. The legal shield he had so carefully constructed had been shattered.
But none of that mattered to me. My world had shrunk to the four walls of Olivia's hospital room. With the threat of Blake gone, a fragile peace settled in the room. I could finally breathe. I could finally focus completely on her. A week after the arrest, something miraculous happened. I was sitting by her bed, reading aloud from one of her favorite poetry books, when I felt a faint pressure on my hand. I stopped reading, my heart leaping into my throat. Her fingers twitched, then tightened around mine. I looked at her face, and her eyelids were fluttering. "Olivia?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "Sweetheart, can you hear me?" Her eyes slowly opened. They were hazy, unfocused, but they were open. A tear slid down my cheek and dripped onto our joined hands. "Mom?" she rasped, her voice a dry, unused thing. The long road to recovery had begun. The first few weeks were a blur of doctors, therapists, and small, monumental victories. The day she could breathe on her own, the day she could sit up, the day she could hold a paintbrush again, her hand shaking but determined. Her memory of the accident was fragmented, like a shattered mirror. But as she grew stronger, the pieces began to come back. One afternoon, as a pale sun streamed through the hospital window, she turned to me, her eyes dark with a remembered terror. "We were arguing," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "He wanted me to sell Grandpa's stock portfolio. He had some new can't-miss investment. I told him no. The inheritance was for my future. For our family." She squeezed my hand, her knuckles white. He got so angry. He had been drinking. He started driving faster and faster, yelling that if I wasn't going to be on his team, I was useless to him. I begged him to slow down. She started to cry, silent, wrenching sobs. "He looked at me, Mom, and he smiled. He said, 'Don't worry, the insurance policy will take care of everything.' Then he floored it." Her testimony was the final nail in Blake's coffin. It transformed the case from circumstantial to a clear-cut act of attempted murder. Faced with Olivia's account and Melissa's story, Blake finally accepted a plea deal rather than face a jury. I sat in the courtroom on the day of his sentencing. He looked diminished in his prison jumpsuit, the charm and arrogance stripped away, leaving only a hollow, pathetic man. He refused to look at me or at the photo of Olivia the prosecutor showed the court. I had submitted a victim impact statement, which the prosecutor read aloud. In it, I didn't speak of my own anger, but of the light he had tried to extinguish. My daughter's talent, her kindness, her future. I spoke of the long nights in the ICU, the uncertainty, and the slow, painful journey back. The judge sentenced him to 25 years to life. As he was led away, I felt nothing but a vast, empty pity. He hadn't just destroyed his life, he had tried to extinguish one of the brightest lights I had ever known. But he had failed. That evening, I went back to the hospital. Olivia was sitting by the window, sketching in a notepad. She looked up as I entered, and a real, genuine smile lit up her face. "He's gone, sweetie," I said softly. "I know," she replied, her gaze turning back to the window, to the setting sun painting the sky in brilliant strokes of orange and pink. Now the real work begins. I sat beside her, and we watched the day end, a mother and daughter who had walked through the darkest of valleys and had, against all odds, found their way back into the light. The fight for justice was over. The journey of healing was just beginning. 18 months can feel like a lifetime, or in our case, the beginning of a new one. The Blake chapter was closed, a grim story bound in legal documents and filed away in a courthouse basement. He was a ghost, a bad memory. Our lives, however, were moving forward, not with the easy grace of before, but with the hard-won strength of survivors. Olivia's recovery was a testament to her incredible spirit. There were days of frustration, of physical pain and emotional setbacks, but for every step back, she took 2 forward. She poured all of her pain, her anger, and her hope into her art. Her studio, once a place of light and color, became a forge. She learned to weld, to bend and shape metal. She found a strange beauty in wreckage, in taking what was broken and creating something new and powerful from it. Tonight was the culmination of that journey. We were standing in a chic, minimalist art gallery in the West Loop. It was the opening night of her first solo exhibition since the accident. The gallery was packed with people, their quiet murmurs a respectful hum beneath the high ceilings. The exhibition was called Rebirth. The pieces were breathtaking. She had created massive, intricate sculptures from the twisted metal of wrecked cars sourced from junkyards. A mangled car door was transformed into the wing of a soaring phoenix. A shattered windshield was pieced back together, embedded in steel to resemble a fractured but resilient heart. It was raw, powerful, and achingly beautiful. It was her story, told in steel and glass. I watched her from across the room. She was talking to a critic from the Tribune, her expression animated, her laugh echoing faintly. She still had a faint scar above her eyebrow, a silver crescent she refused to cover with makeup. She called it her reminder. She looked so strong, so confident. The naive, trusting girl who had fallen for Blake's charm was gone. In her place stood a woman, forged in fire. A young woman approached me, a glass of champagne in her hand. "You must be her mother," she said with a warm smile. "Her work is incredible. So much strength." "Thank you," I said, my heart swelling with a pride so fierce it almost hurt. She is the strongest person I know. Later, when the crowd had thinned, Olivia found me. She pulled me toward the center of the gallery, to her masterpiece. It was a sculpture of 2 figures, their forms abstract but distinctly female, forged from gleaming, polished chrome. One figure was standing tall, her arms outstretched. The other was kneeling but pushing herself up, her hand resting on the standing figure's back for support. They were separate, yet connected, a single piece of shared strength. "That's us," she whispered, her eyes shining. "The woman I am now, and the woman who helped me get here." We stood there for a long moment, mother and daughter, 2 survivors bound by a love that had proven unbreakable. I thought about the journey that had brought us to this point, the fear, the rage, the fight. I had discovered a strength in myself I never knew I possessed. I had learned that a mother's love isn't always soft and gentle. Sometimes it has to be a weapon, it has to be a shield, it has to be a fire that burns away the darkness to make way for the dawn. I didn't regret the fury that had driven me. It was that fury, guided by love and a lifetime of experience, that had saved us both.
My daughter had not only survived, she had triumphed. She had taken the ugliest experience of her life and transformed it into something beautiful, something that could inspire others. A portion of the proceeds from the gallery sales was going to a foundation she had established, a fund to provide legal aid to victims of financial and domestic abuse. She was using her pain to light the way for others. As we prepared to leave, Olivia wrapped her arms around me in a tight hug. "Thank you, Mom," she said into my ear, "for everything, for never giving up." "Never," I whispered back, holding her tight. Our story is a testament to the fact that even when the world is at its darkest, the strength to fight back lies within us. It's about the power of a mother's love, the resilience of the human spirit, and the unshakable truth that even from the most devastating wreckage, a beautiful rebirth is possible. Thank you for letting me share our story with you. It's a reminder that we are all stronger than we think. I hope it brings some measure of hope to anyone facing their own battle. Please share your own stories of strength and resilience in the comments below. Your voice deserves to be heard.